In August of 2014, Nora Whitfield, a 24-year-old geology graduate student from Portland, set out on her first solo hike along the Pacific Crest Trail. She was supposed to hike a short section of the trail between the towns of Sisters and Bend, photograph rocks, collect basalt samples, and return home. 3 days later, her friend came to pick Nora up as agreed. But Whitfield did not show up. 2 years passed, and when a team of loggers came across an old pine tree with a pair of women's shoes stuck in its bark, no one could have imagined that inside one of them was a metal pendant with engraved coordinates. It was these coordinates that revealed what was later called the most eerie find in the Oregon forests. On August 20th, 2014, Nora Whitfield left the boundaries of the Trailhead Comanche Campground, a small parking lot near the beginning of the Pacific Crest Trail between the towns of Sisters and Bend, Oregon. According to the official visitor log, she started on the trail at 8:30 in the morning. The last person to see her alive was a National Forest Service volunteer who was checking hikers' permits. According to him, the girl was calm, friendly, and looked confident. Nora had good equipment, a map with halt points and a light hiking backpack. She planned to hike the section of the route to Tumaniv Falls, a 3-day walk from the starting point. Her friend Jess Miller was to pick her up there. It was her short vacation after her summer internship. The geology graduate student was collecting rock samples for her master's thesis on the volcanic formations of the Cascade Mountains. The route Nora chose was not considered dangerous. It was a popular part of the Pacific Crest Trail, where dozens of hikers hiked every day during the season. The weather was dry, the sky was clear, and visibility was excellent. In the morning before leaving, she had a coffee at the Big Pine Roadside Cafe, left a small tip for the waitress, and asked if there were any areas of unstable ground along the route. This brief exchange was the last evidence of her presence in civilization. 3 days later, on August 23, at 4 in the afternoon, her friend arrived at the same parking lot from which Nora had left. Her car, a gray Subaru SUV, was still there, neatly parked, with no signs of damage. Inside was a supply of water, clean clothes, some food, and a camera. The keys were missing, but Nora had apparently taken her backpack with her personal belongings. The interior was tidy, as if the owner hadn't returned in time. Jess immediately notified the Deschutes County Police. That same night, rangers from the Willamette National Forest arrived at the scene. The next morning, a large-scale search operation began. On the first day, about 30 volunteers and 4 sniffer dogs worked. The area was searched along the main route and side trails where hikers sometimes camped. A helicopter with a thermal imager made several flights over the area, but found nothing. No fresh tracks, broken branches, or fragments of equipment. Detectives arriving from Bend immediately rejected the escape theory. Everything in Nora's apartment in Portland was still in its place: her laptop, dissertation manuscripts, personal diaries, and cash. There were no withdrawals from her accounts. Her phone was last recorded online at 9:45 in the morning of the same day she left for the hike. On the second day of the search, volunteers from neighboring districts were recruited. One of them, former military officer Jacob Finch, recalled that the area where Nora disappeared has many old service roads leading deep into the forest. Some of them are officially closed, but they are still used by local loggers and poachers. This gave rise to the first suspicions, whether the girl could have run into someone who did not want witnesses. The third day of searching brought only silence. The dogs lost the trail a few hundred yards from the parking lot. The rangers assumed that she might have veered off the trail to take pictures in the lava fields and possibly fallen into a narrow ravine. But a check of all available ravines yielded no results. A short note appeared in the local newspaper, the Bend Tribune. Young hiker missing on PCT trail. Search continues. However, hope was weakening with each passing day. After the first week, the active phase of the operation was reduced. Only a small group of specialists continued to comb the area, more as a formality. Nora's parents arrived from Portland a few days after she disappeared. Her mother, Marie Whitfield, walked the trail for several days with her daughter's photo, talking to every hiker she met. Her father assembled a private search party, but even they found nothing. On August 29, the police officially classified the case as a disappearance under unspecified circumstances. A week later, the materials were transferred to the Cold Case Investigation Department. No calls, no letters, no hint that she might have survived. The only thing that remained after Nora Whitfield was a locked car in the parking lot, a boot print in the dust, and a question that no one knew the answer to. Where had the girl who knew these mountains better than anyone else disappeared to? In the months that followed, police received dozens of reports from people who had allegedly seen a similar girl in Oregon, in Washington, even in Canada. But none of them were confirmed. All the evidence came down to zero. The trail she followed ended nowhere. A few months after she disappeared, volunteers put up a small wooden board with her photo and an inscription at the trailhead. She loved these mountains. For most, it was a reminder that even familiar trails can disappear along with those who walk them. Nora Whitfield's case remained unanswered, and the Pacific Crest Trail was left with a new shadow on its map. In July of 2016, a team of loggers from Pioneer Logging was working in the western part of the Willamette National Forest, not far from the old Sierra Canyon quarry. The area was being cleared of dead wood, a routine but dangerous job. The quarry had not been used for a long time, and the area around it was overgrown with dense pine thickets, where even during the day it was twilight. During a lunch break, one of the workers, 42-year-old Joe Nelson, sat down under an old ponderosa pine to escape the heat. He was the first to notice the strangeness. According to him, the sun was breaking through the branches and shining on something metal high above his head. Joe looked up and at first thought it was a piece of shiny wire or the remains of old equipment often found in the forests after storms. But when he looked closer, he saw a pair of women's shoes hanging from the trunk as if they had grown together. The boots were hanging on a thick branch at a height of about 5 meters. They were tightly tied together with laces and had eaten into the bark over the years. The fabric and leather had darkened over time, but the shape was still intact. Joe called the foreman. The workers stopped the machinery and decided to get the find before it was smashed by the felling. One of them climbed onto the truck to reach the branch. They took off the boots carefully. They were surprisingly heavy. When they were put on the ground, everyone saw that they were not just old. There was an object inside. Joe, who had a habit of digging into anything strange, took off the insole of his left shoe. Under it was a small round metal pendant in the shape of a compass, about the size of a coin. It was made of dark metal, almost undamaged, and surprisingly clean. On the back of it were small but clear numbers that looked like coordinates. No one made a joke. The men remained silent while the foreman called the sheriff of Deschutes County. In places like this, any discovery involving human belongings is taken seriously. A lost hiker, a hunter, a missing person. Until the police arrived, the boots were put in a clean plastic bag and left under guard. The sheriff arrived the same evening. He was accompanied by a forensic scientist and a Forest Service field expert. No traces were found nearby. No debris, no remnants of fabric, nothing that would indicate an accident. The boots, judging by the shape, were women's, approximately size 7, a brand known among tourists, Lion Track. They were sold in stores in Portland about 5 years ago. The metal pendant was immediately sent for examination. The police suggested that it could be a personal talisman or part of a piece of jewelry. The engraving seemed suspicious, too precise for a random detail. The next day, the laboratory confirmed that the numbers corresponded to the format of GPS coordinates. When the information about the find was entered into the database, the program automatically generated a match. 2 years ago, a young woman named Nora Whitfield went missing in the same county, about 20 miles away. Her car was then found locked near a campground, but the search was inconclusive. She was still listed as missing on the missing persons list. The sheriff personally contacted her parents. They arrived from Portland the same day. When they were shown a photo of the pendant, her mother immediately recognized it. According to her, it was a talisman that Nora had been wearing since she was a student. It belonged to her grandfather, a geologist who once worked in the same mountain system. On the reverse side, she said, he had once engraved the coordinates of the first expedition. Experts confirmed the authenticity of the words. The numbers did indeed lead to a section of the Three Sisters mountain range, a remote part of the protected area where lava flows once took place. Police reports mentioned that at the time of the discovery, Nora's father stood by the evidence table for a long time, looking at the pendant through a plastic bag. Then he said, "She would never have lost this." The discovery immediately became the key to reopening the case. The prosecutor's office resumed an active investigation, although it was not formally closed. The sheriff's department announced that the boots and pendant might be the first real evidence of where the girl had disappeared. Brief notes appeared in the press, but the location itself was not disclosed for fear of an influx of sensation hunters. Joe Nelson later told reporters that after that shift, none of the workers wanted to return to that pine tree. It stood alone in the middle of a cleared field, with deep cracks in its bark, looking like a living monument. Locals began to call it the boot tree. The police took samples of the bark and soil around it, hoping to find additional traces. But time did its work. Moisture destroyed all biological materials. Nevertheless, detectives concluded that the boots had been deliberately hung. They could not have been carried away by wind or animals. Someone had hung them there by tying the laces, or perhaps left them as a sign, or as a hint. The discovery of the pendant with the coordinates changed the nature of the case. From now on, the police had a direction, but no one could answer the main question: who left the boots and why? Yet. The forest was silent, as if it was guarding its secret. When the results of the examination confirmed that the numbers on the back of the pendant were genuine GPS coordinates, Nora Whitfield's case returned to the center of attention of the Deschutes County Police Department. After 2 years of silence, she suddenly received a lead. At first, however, investigators were incredulous at the discovery. In his office on the second floor of the Sheriff's Department, Detective Sam Thorne, who had been leading the investigation from the beginning, spread out maps in front of him. The coordinates led to a remote part of the Three Sisters mountain range, an area that was part of a protected wilderness area. It was not a tourist area, but a hard-to-reach area of lava fields and caves where even experienced rangers rarely went on foot. The place was located 15 miles from where the boots were found, a distance that even an experienced hiker could not have covered for no reason. The investigators were divided. Some believed that the coordinates could have been a simple geological note by Nora herself, perhaps a point she wanted to explore or photograph. Others, including Thorne, saw something more to it. The fact that the pendant was hidden in a shoe did not seem to be an accident. Someone had left the mark on purpose, perhaps even the criminal himself. Officially, the location by the coordinates was outside the area of authorized access. Any transportation was prohibited, and movement was allowed only with the written permission of the Wildlife Service. This meant that a full-fledged expedition had to be prepared to check the location. The sheriff filed a request with the federal administration, and a week later, permission was granted. A small group was formed for the trip. Detective Thorne, 2 rangers, Tom Bailey and Lucas Rhine, both with experience in caving expeditions. They were provided with navigation devices, climbing equipment, and 2 portable radios. On July the 24th, the group set off. They left the car at the border of the reserve and continued on foot. The route ran through dense pine thickets, where the soft soil suddenly gave way to black lava slabs. In some places, the landscape resembled a frozen stream, sharp, fragile, with cracks that went several feet deep. The wind brought the smell of volcanic dust, and the sun cut their eyes, reflecting in the stone. After a few hours, they crossed a line of dry streams and reached the plateau where, according to the maps, the final coordinate point was supposed to be. The GPS showed a deviation of only a few yards. The place seemed deserted. There were no signs of recent human activity around, no trails, no debris, no burned branches. However, Thorne noticed a strange detail. There was a narrow gap between the pile of boulders that looked like a natural fault. It ran at an angle to the slope and ended in a dark hole in the lava wall. The rangers went down below and cautiously examined the entrance. The opening was too narrow for a tourist cave, but it clearly showed traces of an old rope tied to a large stone near the edge. Its remains had almost crumbled with time, but the knot was still intact. Under the layer of dust, they found a few rotten fibers and a fragment of fabric, possibly from a hiking backpack. The Forest Service maps did not show any caves in this area. Thorne recorded the coordinates in his report and took several pictures. According to Ranger Rhine, similar formations could be entrances to lava tunnels formed after eruptions several thousand years ago. They are deep, complex, and still almost unexplored. The group decided not to go inside without the proper equipment, but Thorne noticed that there were small stones under the layer of ash and moss at the entrance, as if someone had once deliberately tried to disguise the opening. It looked too orderly for a random natural structure. After a brief inspection, they took measurements and marked the spot on a map. The detective took a close-up photo of the rope knot and noticed that it was not a climbing rope, but a regular polypropylene rope, the kind often used in farms or campsites. When the group returned to base camp, Thorne wrote in his report, "The hole found could be a potential location where Whitfield disappeared or where she has been since her disappearance. The cave system in the vicinity should be checked." This entry was the first official confirmation that the case was taking on a different character. Upon returning to the sheriff's office, the detective wrote a detailed report. It stated that the coordinates could not have been accidental. They led exactly to an unknown object hidden in an area where an ordinary tourist would hardly have gotten there on his own. It was an area where even experienced climbers move cautiously, using maps of old lava flows. For most of her colleagues, there was still a possibility that Whitfield had simply gotten lost and had written down the coordinates earlier as part of her research. But Thorne did not share this opinion. He was alarmed that someone had hidden the pendant with the coordinates in his shoe knot around his neck, not in his backpack, but in a way that would take years to find. It didn't look like a trace of a person who wanted to be rescued. Rather, it looked like a clue left behind after it was too late to save. That evening, while looking through the pictures of the cave entrance, Thorne made a quick note in his diary. "The coordinates are not the end. They are an invitation." The expedition to the Three Sisters mountain range began at dawn. Detective Sam Thorne and two rangers, Tom Bailey and Lucas Rhine, returned to the spot where they had discovered an unknown opening among the lava blocks the day before. This time, they had permission to conduct a full-fledged investigation and the appropriate equipment: climbing helmets, ropes, flashlights, and surveillance cameras. The terrain remained dangerous: slippery stones, cracks full of dust, and sharp drops in elevation, which could cost lives if you made a wrong move. Entering the hole, they immediately felt the change in the air. It was dry, cool, and quiet inside, so much so that even the rustling of dust underfoot seemed loud. The lanterns cut through the darkness with narrow beams, revealing walls made of frozen waves of lava, black and shiny like glass. The cave turned out to be more than just a fault. A real system of tunnels lay before them. Moving cautiously, the group marked each turn with chalk so as not to lose their bearings. After a few hundred yards, the tunnel branched off. One branch led down, the other into a wide grotto that, at first glance, might have been a natural hall. It was there that they noticed the first traces of human presence. An old sleeping bag lay on the stone floor. The fabric was shriveled from time to time, but retained its shape. Nearby, there were several empty, unlabeled cans and a plastic bottle with a peeling lid. Everything is covered with an even layer of dust that has been accumulating for at least several years. Forensic experts later confirmed that there were no fingerprints or biological traces. However, the arrangement of things showed that this was not an accidental traveler's camp. Everything looked too neat, as if the person who was here knew that he or she would have to leave in a hurry. On the wall of the grotto, Tom Bailey saw something that looked like a mark. When they illuminated the spot with a flashlight, they could see a stone arrow lined with small fragments of basalt. It pointed further into the tunnel. The Forest Service uses such markers for orientation underground, but here it was unusual. The arrow was not made of soft sandstone, but of fragments matched in color. Someone had spent time and effort on this. The tracks led through a narrow passage where we had to move almost on all fours. The air was getting colder, and there was a pungent smell of sulfur. At the end of the passage, Thorne said, the tunnel suddenly widened into a small chamber with a low ceiling. There, in the corner, he noticed a burnt spot, the remains of a fire. Nearby were 2 charred logs and a short piece of rope. It looked the same as the one found at the entrance, a synthetic cord, partially cut and stretched. Thorne took a picture of the discovery and ordered nothing to be moved. The inspection report later noted, quote, 3. After several hours of investigation, it became apparent that a person had been in the cave for at least a few days. But there was no body or any remains. No traces of struggle, no clothes, no bones, not even pieces of equipment. The cave looked as if its owner had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a silent testament to his presence. When the group came to the surface, Thorne stood at the entrance for a long time, peering into the darkness. He recorded in his report that the objects he found could not have belonged to a casual tourist. The location of the camp deep in the cave, the lack of marks on the cans, and the rope marks hinted at something else, an attempt to hide or hold someone by force. Upon returning to the base, the rangers confirmed that this part of the lava massif was not marked on official maps. The cave was unknown even to local cavers. In the report of the Nature Service, it was described as an unregistered lava tunnel. After a detailed analysis of the photos and reports, the forensic team came to several conclusions. First, the nature of the dust indicated that no one had entered the tunnel for at least 2 years, since Nora Whitfield disappeared. Second, the rope found could have been cut with a knife or sharp instrument. The edge of the fibers had a smooth, fresh cut that had been preserved despite moisture and time. This meant that the rope was cut after it had been used. The presence of traces of a fire, camp, and rope formed a new hypothesis. Nora could have been alive for some time after her disappearance, or someone else was there who knew about her fate. An official report from the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office recorded a change in the status of the case. It was no longer considered an accidental disappearance. A criminal investigation was opened under the article, Kidnapping. The cave site was declared closed to visitors. The entrance was disguised with stone slabs, guards and warning signs were installed. All the items inside, a sleeping bag, cans, rope, ashes, were seized as evidence. The cave, which no one knew about on any map, became the center of Oregon's most high-profile investigation. Among the lava walls, where hot stones once flowed, there were now traces of someone else's story. Short, interrupted, but obviously human. And everyone who went down there said one thing afterwards. In that silence, you can hear the darkness itself breathing. A few weeks passed after the expedition to the lava cave. There were no new leads in Nora Whitfield's case, and public attention began to wane again. Then Detective Sam Thorne decided to take a step that had previously been considered too risky. He went to the press. A small article appeared in the Bend Bulletin newspaper with photos of things found underground: a sleeping bag, unmarked cans, an empty bottle. The caption under the photo clarified, quote, 4. The text went out on Saturday morning, and in the evening, a man called the police station's phone. His voice was hesitant, but his trembling seemed sincere. He identified himself as a former employee of Pioneer Logging and said that in the summer of 2014, he had worked near the Sierra Canyon quarry. He did not want his name disclosed. He agreed to meet only on the condition of anonymity. The next day, Thorne met him at a roadside cafe on the outskirts of Bend. The man looked exhausted, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. According to the detective, he did not make eye contact, often paused and kept his hands in his pockets even while talking. The witness explained that he was then a truck driver who transported wood. His crew was cleaning old forest roads near the reserve line. One day, around mid-August, he was driving around a remote area to check the condition of the road. There, near a narrow branch that led in the direction of the Three Sisters mountain range, he saw a van, an old white Dodge Ram van. The car was standing strangely, as if deliberately hidden behind pine trees, although part of the body was still visible from the road. There was no one behind the wheel. Nearby, near the luggage door, a man in a camouflage jacket was unloading something. The witness couldn't see what it was, but he noticed that the man was acting in a hurry. He was pulling large packages wrapped in tarpaulin out of the car and putting them into the bushes. When asked why he didn't stop, the man replied, "I thought it was better to stay out of it. Such places have their own rules." In that part of the forest, illegal logging and marijuana plantations were often encountered, so the workers were used to avoiding unnecessary contact. But this incident, he says, stuck in his mind immediately because of a seemingly small detail. When the van moved off, the witness clearly saw the license plate. It began with the letters XJ and ended with 13. The man said he remembered it because the thought of an unlucky number came to mind. Later that evening, he heard a short radio report about a missing girl from Portland who had gone hiking and never returned. Although the connection between the two events seemed vague at the time, the memory has haunted him ever since. He admitted that he had tried several times to tell someone about the van, but each time he gave up the idea, afraid that he would be accused of involvement or not believed. But when a photo of the cans from the cave appeared in the newspaper, he recognized the shape of the cans. They were the same kind of cans, unmarked, that were brought to their logging site by suppliers from Eugene. Thorne entered the testimony into the record. Although the witness could not give the exact date, the geographical landmarks coincided with the direction that led to the place where the entrance to the lava cave was later found. This fact first linked the Sierra Canyon quarry area to the possible movement of an unknown vehicle. The mention of a white Dodge became the starting point of a new phase. The Sheriff's Department began checking all vehicles of this brand registered in Oregon and neighboring states between 2013 and 2015. Analysts checked a database of more than 100 records, narrowing the search to a few cars with similar license plate combinations. In addition, Thorne asked the Department of Transportation for surveillance camera footage along the roads leading to the protected area. Some of the data had already been deleted, but a few archived images were preserved. One of them, dated late August, shows a white van crossing a bridge over the Mackenzie River. The image is fuzzy, but the general outline matches the witness's description. After the article was published, the newspaper began receiving letters. People wrote that they had also seen a white van near the forest roads that summer. One letter came from a former ranger who claimed to have seen a similar vehicle near an old hunting camp, about 10 miles from the quarry. None of these signals were certain, but together they created a clear trend. Someone could indeed be using the area as a hideout. For Sam Thorne, this was the first real breakthrough. He carefully reviewed the search protocols of 2014 and noticed that one sector, located southeast of the quarry, had not been combed because of a landslide. It was because of this landslide that the road there was believed to be impassable. Now this area coincided with the direction where the witness had seen the van. Officially, the details of the meeting with the anonymous employee were not disclosed, but a new item appeared in the police report. Search for a vehicle, white Dodge Ram van, license plate approximately XJ13, likely to be in Deschutes County in August 2014. Thus, an investigation that had been stalled for years finally had a face, albeit only the shadow of a man in camouflage unloading something among the trees. But even this shadow was bigger than all the previous traces combined. A few days later, after a witness described a white Dodge Ram van with a license plate ending in 13, a match was found in the Department of Transportation's databases. The car belonged to a 51-year-old resident of Eugene, Royce McBride. The name did not cause much resonance. There was nothing in his file that would suggest serious crimes. Only minor violations: illegal fishing, a bar fight, parking tickets. But for Detective Sam Thorne, it was enough to start surveillance. McBride's house was on the outskirts of Eugene, in a quiet neighborhood with low fences and old maple trees. His neighbors described him as a man who kept to himself. "He's always alone," one of them said. Shapnafa, quote, sick. Others recalled that the man often went to the mountains for several days, sometimes even a week. He would return with dust on his clothes and an empty van, not talking to anyone, just nodding briefly in response. He worked as a mechanic at a small car repair shop called AJ Automotive on the outskirts of the city. His colleagues described him as a professional who rarely joked and never left a trace behind. His work box was always in perfect order. The tools were laid out by size, and a metal box labeled "Personal" stood on the shelf. Thorne ordered surveillance to be organized. 2 operatives were on duty near the house day and night, recording all trips. In the first days, they didn't notice anything suspicious. McBride behaved calmly, left for work, returned in the evening, and sometimes went out to the yard for a smoke. But a week later, he drove off again, heading north, following a route that led toward the mountains. The car disappeared from surveillance cameras near the town of Sisters. It was then that the department received the results of a background check. It turned out that 10 years ago, McBride was a member of a paranoid survivalist group called the Northwest Defenders. The group consisted of several dozen people who preached the idea of living outside the system. They trained to survive in the wild, built shelters, and learned how to do without communication and civilization. In 2010, the group disintegrated after a conflict with the authorities. The police found illegal weapons and homemade traps at one of the training grounds. Most of the members disappeared from the radar, but McBride's name was listed among the active participants. This fact became a decisive argument for obtaining a search warrant. The prosecutor's office issued a permit to check the house, garage, and vehicle. On Friday morning, when the suspect was at work, a group of 6 detectives arrived at his home. The garage was locked with a massive padlock. It had been cut with a grinder. Inside, under a tarp, was a white Dodge Ram van. At first glance, it looked ordinary, with no signs of recent use. But upon closer inspection, forensic experts found small fibers on the inner lining of the trunk. They matched the color and structure of the rope found at the entrance to the lava cave. On the passenger seat was an old topographic atlas of Oregon. Between the pages was a sheet of paper with a pencil route drawn on it. The line started from the parking lot near the Pacific Crest Trail and went to a point marked with a cross in the Three Sisters Range. The coordinates coincided with the place where detectives discovered a cave a few weeks ago. This discovery removed all doubt. When McBride returned home, he was already waiting for him. According to the arresting officer, the man did not resist, only raised his eyebrows in surprise and spoke softly. Finally, he was immediately taken to the Deschutes County Police Station for questioning. The camera footage shows him sitting up straight, his hands folded on the table, his voice calm. He admits that the map belongs to him, but explains that he marked the places where he caught trout and set up his tent. He says that he often travels to those areas to fish and uses the van as a sleeping place. When asked about the rope, he says that every camper has one. Whitfield has allegedly heard of Nora, but only from the news. His lawyer files a motion for release, citing a lack of direct evidence. Indeed, at the time, the police had only a map, a fiber match, and the testimony of an anonymous logging company employee. No DNA samples were found that would unequivocally link him to the missing woman. Meanwhile, investigators continued to analyze the materials seized from the house. In the basement, they found a shelf with military rations, water filters, and old radios. One box had a label on it that read Sentinels NW. This once again confirmed his connection to the survivalist group, whose members considered wilderness areas a refuge from fallen society. For Thorne, this man became the first real suspect who could explain how and why Nora Whitfield was off the trail. But without evidence to tie him to the crime scene, the case remained shaky. As McBride was leaving the interrogation, he dropped a phrase that the officers recorded in the report. "In the mountains, everyone is their own boss, and no one knows who will meet whom first." To most people, this sounded like meaningless bravado, but to Thorne it was a hint. He ordered the surveillance to remain in place and to keep the van in the evidence lot. Even if there was a lack of facts, his intuition was right. Royce McBride knows much more than he is saying, and perhaps he was the man who had turned the silence under the pines into someone's eternal trap. A few days after Royce McBride's arrest, the case was left in limbo. The Deschutes County Prosecutor's Office frankly stated that there was not enough evidence. The testimony of an anonymous employee, fibers from the trunk of the van, a map with a marked route, all of this looked like a chain of assumptions, not evidence. Without DNA or physical evidence of a connection to Nora Whitfield, the kidnapping charge had no chance of standing up in court. Detective Sam Thorne, who had spent 2 years piecing together any information about the missing girl, realized that he was backed into a corner. McBride, on the other hand, was confident. During interrogations, he repeated the same version. He went fishing in the mountains, drew a map for convenience, and used a rope as a common camping gear. His lawyer, an experienced lawyer from Eugene, filed complaint after complaint demanding that his client be released immediately for lack of evidence. After a lengthy hearing, the judge agreed. Suspicion without evidence is not a basis for detention. McBride was to be released. For Thorne, this decision was a personal defeat. He saw before him a man who, in his opinion, knew what had happened to Nora, but was skillfully hiding behind the law. When McBride left the courthouse, he did not say a word. According to the officer who accompanied him to the exit, he merely nodded and smiled slightly, calmly, almost dismissively. Detective Thorne recalled this expression more than once. It had something of the self-satisfaction of a hunter who realizes that the game has slipped away this time. Officially, McBride was a free man. Unofficially, he was under round-the-clock surveillance. Thorne gave an unspoken order not to remove the surveillance. 2 teams were assigned to him, one at home and one at work. The agents acted cautiously. No harassment, only observation from a distance. In the evening, the man behaved as usual. He repaired his car, bought groceries in a nearby store, and spent the night at home. Nothing happened for the first 2 days, but on the 3rd morning, everything changed. That day, forensic experts were finishing up a second examination of the van, which was still in the police parking lot. They dismantled the vehicle to its metal frame, checking every detail. And then one of the experts noticed the floor of the luggage compartment, a metal sheet with a double gasket. Under it, they found a narrow hidden compartment. Inside was an old portable GPS navigator. The device was dusty but in good working order. When it was plugged in, a map appeared on the screen. Several marked points were stored in the memory. One of them was called the Vault. The coordinates did not lead to Oregon, but far to the north, deep into the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington state. This discovery changed everything. If McBride really had nothing to do with the disappearance, why would he hide a GPS in the van, and why would one of the points have a name that sounded like a confession? Thorne had no doubt that this was his chance. He ordered McBride to be immediately detained for further questioning. The task force traveled to Eugene that night. The plan was simple: act quickly before the suspect knew the police had found something. A group of 5 agents arrived at the house around 3 in the morning. The house looked calm. The lights were off, and the gate was locked. One of the agents opened the door with a spare key he had taken during the search. Inside, there was silence. In the living room, a lamp was on the table. Next to it was a paper cup with half-drunk coffee and a bus ticket to Portland, bought exactly an hour ago. In the bedroom, the bed was scattered, but no suitcases were found. Everything pointed to a hasty departure. The detectives checked the garage. The van was still there, but it was missing a few parts: a spare tank, a canister, a toolkit, and an old shovel. Several boxes of dry rations were also missing from the basement shelves. The disappearance did not look like a flight from panic, but a well-thought-out exodus. According to a neighbor who was interviewed in the morning, McBride had left the house the night before, allegedly to rent a room near the train station. He was wearing a camouflage jacket and a small backpack. She recalled that he said goodbye with his usual short nod, as if he was going on a regular trip. Thorne arrived a few hours later. He looked around the room, at the ticket, at the remains of the coffee, and stared silently at the empty couch. A short line appeared in his notebook. Quote, "That day, the police checked all the bus stations and ticketing points. No driver could say for sure that they had seen him among the passengers. Video cameras at the central station captured a man who looked like McBride entering the waiting room with a backpack, but a few minutes later, the camera lost him in the crowd. Tension gripped the case again. Thorne realized he had lost more than just a suspect. Now he was dealing with someone who knew how the system worked and how to leave no trace. McBride didn't look like he was being pursued. He looked ready. In the report that was submitted to the prosecutor's office, the last paragraph was short. Quote 99. For Detective Thorne, this was the moment when the Whitfield case first lost its boundaries. He was no longer investigating a disappearance. He was hunting, and now the man he was chasing was one step ahead. A few weeks after Royce McBride's escape, the coordinates found in his GPS became a new direction for the search. A point labeled Vault led to a remote part of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington state. It was a wilderness area that was off the beaten path: narrow clearings, wetlands, and dense spruce undergrowth. Entry was prohibited for vehicles, and the only way to get there was on foot. At the end of August, an expeditionary team consisting of Detective Sam Thorne, 2 rangers, and a forensic scientist from Portland set out to find the coordinates. The journey took 2 days. The weather was unstable, with alternating fog and light rain making the ground slippery. The forest seemed endless and gloomy, with dark gaps between the trees where daylight did not reach. Even for experienced rangers, the place had an eerie aura. When the instrument showed that the marked point was less than 200 yards away, they slowed down. The coordinates led to a small ravine, almost invisible from the main trail. Its slopes were overgrown with dense ferns and young cedars. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary ravine. There are thousands of them throughout the massif. But at the top of the slope, the detective noticed a strange pile of branches folded into a bizarre cone. It looked like someone was trying to disguise a hole. The rangers carefully dismantled the cover. Under the layer of branches and pine needles, they could see the ground, darkened by moisture. One of them dug with a shovel, and a metallic sound cut through the silence. Under the first layer of soil, they found a fragment of fabric. Then, at a depth of about 2 feet, bones began to appear. When they dug enough, it became clear. It was a human skeleton. Next to it were the remains of a gray sleeping bag, a rusted can of canned food, and a burnt metal spoon. Experts from the crime lab confirmed that there were no signs of animals or natural sediment at the burial site. Everything looked like a deliberate hidden burial. The location of the body, the depth, and the pine needles lining showed that someone had taken the time to hide the remains carefully, but not professionally. Later, in the laboratory, forensic experts analyzed the teeth and bone structure. The data matched Nora Whitfield's medical records. The final confirmation came from DNA testing. It was her. Preliminary results indicated that death occurred approximately a few days after her disappearance. There were no signs of violent trauma. The most likely cause is hypothermia, exhaustion, and dehydration. The conditions in the area could have killed even an experienced hiker. Sharp temperature changes, humidity, lack of water sources. But the main question remained unanswered. How did she end up here, hundreds of miles from where she was last seen? Detective Thorne personally participated in the field investigation. According to one of the rangers, when he saw the bones, he just stood there in silence for a few minutes while the others continued their work. He wrote briefly in his report, Chatrasdar, quote 10. However, even after this official conclusion, questions only multiplied. Why did McBride take her here? Why did he choose a forest in a neighboring state where no one would connect him to the Oregon incident? And most mysteriously, why did he leave a pendant with the coordinates of this place in his shoe? Was it a game or an attempt to leave a clue that only he would understand? During the re-examination of the excavation site, several small details were discovered. An old lantern, long since exhausted, and a plastic lighter package were lying in the branches nearby. Both items had no identification markings. They left no trace, but confirmed that someone had been here after Whitfield's death. A week after the body was found, Thorne received a message from the Nevada State Police. An abandoned white Dodge van was found at a truck stop near the city of Reno. Inside was an empty tank, a clean interior, and no documents. The license plates were removed, the seats were wiped clean. On the dashboard was a piece of an Oregon map with a stamp from a car dealership in Eugene. The van was registered as missing. The last owner, Royce McBride, was not listed in the database as a wanted criminal. All attempts to find his traces in Nevada or other states failed. Highway cameras did not capture him after the date of his departure from Eugene. No bus or hotel had a reservation in his name. It seemed as if he had simply disappeared, leaving only his route in the GPS memory. Officially, the case was reclassified as a murder with an unspecified motive. However, no evidence was ever found that Whitfield's death was the result of violence. For the police, it was a dead end. The body was found, but the forest did not give them any answers. In the fall of that year, Nora's remains were returned to her family. The funeral took place in Portland, in a narrow circle of relatives. Her mother refused to comment publicly. The only thing she told journalists was that a terrible truth is better than silence. The case remained officially open. In the reports, it appeared under the number 149-14 as an unsolved case. But for everyone involved in the investigation, everything was clear. Forrest Gifford Pinchot had given the body, but he had taken everything else: time, truth, and meaning. The FBI database had a note next to Royce McBride's name: location unknown, probably alive. And this line, like the coordinates on his device, remained the last reminder of a man who knew what had happened among the trees, but chose to take that answer with him.